Welcome to Beyond the Balance Sheet, the podcast that helps advisors, clinical professionals, and affluent families understand the complexities of issues related to our mental, physical, and emotional well-being. Our co-hosts, Arden O'Connor and Diana Clark, will interview a series of guests on a range of topics, providing informative content and practical tools for professionals and families to consider. Here are your hosts, Arden and Diana.
Hi, and welcome to an episode of Beyond the Balance Sheet. Today's guest is O'Connor Professional Group's very own Director of Aging Services, Sam Van Kalkeren. He has been a psychiatric nurse and since 2012 has been working with a variety of age populations ranging from infancy to aging, geriatrics. He works with a variety of people with different diagnoses, including neurocognitive disorders, complex mental health diagnoses, substance use, and other co-occurring disorders. We are thrilled to have him. He's a new member of our team. And what he brings to us is a rounding out of an expertise in geriatrics, which we have always been working with, but now we have the medical side covered as well. So I'd love to welcome you to this podcast, Sam. Thank you for joining.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here and very happy to have joined the O'Connor Professional Group.
Thank you. So let's imagine, and this is not too far for many of our listeners and not too far from me, you have a parent and you live out of state and you're starting to notice some signs of cognitive decline, and you decide that you're going to go to a medical appointment with them, and they receive a diagnosis of either mild cognitive impairment or a neurocognitive disorder. They're on a new journey. As their kids, what do we do now?
Yeah,
that's a big question.
It's a big question. It's a great question. And it's also one that can be very challenging to both the child and the person diagnosed with the mild cognitive disorder or dementia. First, you want to take advantage of the time. Now that it's early on in the symptoms, so symptoms most likely are mild. So you want to take advantage of that time. You can look for a caregiver to help you navigate the system because one, it's a very expensive system. So you don't want to make mistakes. So look for someone to help kind of guide you and your loved one through that time period. And there are different things that you can do. You also need to make sure that it's safe for your loved one to be living independently. And most likely, since it's early on, it will be safe for them to be living independently, but they need to have the right supports in place to do that. Also, what you want to do is you want to have a plan, and you want to include your loved one in that plan, because this diagnosis can really strip someone's independence and take away their autonomy. So you want to include your loved one in this plan, listen to their voices, and really hear what they want for the remainder of their life. And this is the time that you can have difficult conversations, like if someone wants to have a DNI in place, like do not intubate, a DNR, do not resuscitate. If they want medical orders for life-sustaining treatments, so like a feeding tube or IV fluids. So these are going to be difficult conversations for you to have with your parent because you are kind of looking at the end of life for them. And it may be way down the road. As you know, mild cognitive impairment and any form of dementia is kind of called the long goodbye. So it's going to be a long journey, which is unfortunate. And also, when you're having these conversations, you want to kind of get everything together in order. So, there are many suggestions that you create a binder. So with medications, their medical history, their diagnoses, what tests were involved to make this determination. You can get all your legal information together. Also, just list of medications, list of emergency contacts. So have that all together. That way, whoever is supporting your loved one, because you're out of state, will be able to have that information readily available if any emergencies were to happen.
That's great. That's solid advice. What are the benefits of hiring somebody as a care partner in this process? I would imagine that many of us, with college degrees and are educated think, I can figure this out. I can buy a few books. I can go online and I'll figure out the next best memory care unit for her.
Yeah.
So
no, the benefits of having it's really important to have a care partner if you can afford one. The care partner is going to be experienced in this stage. They're going to help you navigate the system, and like I had mentioned before, it's a really expensive system where mistakes are easily made. So you may be doing your research and you'll think, oh, I found this great place, or this is a person that I can contact, and you'll go down that path, and then you'll realize, no, this was not the right path for my loved one. And also you'll experience along the ways, most likely, inappropriate placements or unnecessary hospitalizations. And having a care partner along this journey with you can help you kind of be your touchstone and prevent all that from happening.
Yeah. Let's imagine that this family, you, me, has had the wherewithal and the resources to retain and engage a care partner in this process. What are some of the misconceptions that this care partner is going to disabuse the family of in those first initial meetings? What is that conversation, like a fly on the wall, likely to look like?
So I want to mention that the diagnosis of dementia, everyone experiences these symptoms differently. So if I were to be diagnosed with dementia and you were to be diagnosed with dementia, it's going to be different for both of us. So one common misconception is that a person with dementia cannot live at home independently. So this is not true. They can live at home independently, but with the right supports in place. And a care partner will help you kind of identify what those supports are. And you want to make sure that the person's safe to be at home. Research shows that someone with dementia live a happier, longer life at home. But again, they need to have the right supports in place. Another misconception that family members may think is that their loved one can no longer work. Now, it really depends on the profession of the person who's just diagnosed. But for many, people can continue working. But again, you just have to have the right supports in place. And another common misconception is that people with dementia cannot speak for themselves. Now, as a caregiver myself, when I'm working with a family, I see family members try to make decisions for their loved one when that loved one with dementia is capable of making those decisions. And that further takes away the autonomy. And what we often see is that person starts to get aggravated or agitated because they can make these decisions. They've been living their whole life making decisions, and now their child is taking that away from them, and this disease has taken that away from them. So you want to respect their autonomy and really adjust the way that you communicate with the loved one. Some examples of this, speak slowly, speak clearly. You want to give limited options to them, give them choices, and also give them time to respond.
That makes sense. In some situations, I would imagine that you would plant a seed with a question and then say, I'm going to follow back up with you, take a few minutes, think about it, and then repose the question?
Yes, you can do that. Yeah. You can repose the question to the person. Also, if you can guide the conversation with the person as well. Early on, the symptoms most likely are not as severe, so you can have those conversations. But as the disease progresses, when you're working with someone with dementia and you're asking questions, you want to just, again, guide the conversation, but limit choices. When you're helping someone get ready or dress for the day, you want to offer them options to wear what clothes they want to wear. So when you're putting that out, you can just, as a green sweater, do you want to wear the blue sweater today, and not a whole array of options. And when you're also discussing food, what they want to have for lunch, don't just walk to someone, oh, what do you want to have for lunch right now? And they're not going to know how to respond if they're further along in the disease process. So ask them, what would you like, a chicken sandwich today or tuna sandwich? Just something that, they have limited options and then they can easily pick from.
So throughout the process, as long as they are able, they get to make the decisions or have input in those decisions.
Yes.
And that titrates down, I would imagine, in importance of those decisions as the disease progresses.
Oh, yeah, most definitely.
So that person who comes into that doctor's appointment with their mom gets this early diagnosis, they leave that appointment, and all of a sudden they start feeling like they're going to take charge. What do you recommend to that child who just heard that news that their mother is going, or father is going to be on this journey? What's the first bit of advice you would offer?
Take a breath. First, breathe, let the information digest, and then also reach out to family, friends, contacts. Like there's a stigma that we don't talk about dementia or neurocognitive disorders, but most likely you'll have someone or know someone who's gone through this before. So reach out to someone, do some research. You can look for, again, a care partner, find someone just to have a conversation with, to help kind of guide you for the next steps. But it's really important to remember that, you don't want to rush into anything. You don't want to make any decisions under the gun. And again, this early diagnosis is a great time to take advantage, to get all your ducks in a row. So just breathe, take time, and involve your loved one in the conversations as well. That's really important to really understand what their needs and wants are.
That makes perfect sense to me. I would imagine that those folks with significant financial resources and a declining cognitive capacity would be targets for manipulation and for, basically taking advantage of. How do we as family members help them not be in that position?
Yeah. So even someone without, an older person without dementia can be a target of financial abuse. If someone has cognitive impairments, if they are lonely, if they have physical ailments where they need help with daily, like assisted ADLs, activities of daily living, those people are at higher risk of being exploited financially. So what families can do is they need to educate themselves on different types of financial scams. These can include lottery scams, telemarketing scams, home mortgage scams. Also, even it can happen inside the family. So maybe you are an older sibling living out of state, and you kind of are the family lead, and you have a younger sibling living near the family who may have their own issues going on and take advantage of your loved one at that time. They may have abuse their ATM card or have them write checks or pressure them to make payments for them. So what families can do is really, educate yourself on these scams. You can have your loved ones simplify their financial assets, simplify banks. If they have multiple banks, limit that down. Talk with a financial advisor. You can also talk to the financial institutions to have 1 to 2 trusted people put onto the account, or have the financial institution reach out to that person if there is question of a high charge or expense. And also you can set someone up to review, like on a regular basis, expenses in the accounts to make sure that there's nothing suspicious going on.
Thank you. That's really good practical advice. Question about the crossover between a dementia and a psychiatric admission. I would imagine that there is some crossover when somebody is in a diagnosis, that there may be situations where their symptoms become psychiatrically acute. Mm-hmm. What happens when somebody goes into the hospital on a psych admission?
Yeah, so this is one area where you really want someone to be able to advocate for your loved one. So if you're living out of state and your loved one goes into a hospital system, you really want someone there to advocate for them. For most of my career, I was working on inpatient psychiatric settings, working with all different populations, working on geriatric inpatient psych units, and we would see this a lot. We'd see someone who is living maybe in an assisted living community start to develop psychiatric symptoms that assisted living community was not able to handle. They're probably, I'm sure that they were getting amazing care, but the assisted living communities, independent living communities can only handle so much, and they're only set up to handle so much, and they may not even have the staff to provide the support. So when you're in an assisted living and you start to develop or display psychiatric symptoms, and it becomes unsafe for you or the resident, where you need to be kind of on a one-to-one observation, that's when usually the assisted living will send a loved one to the emergency department for care. And this could be avoided if you have the right supports in place. You could have an advocate contacted and come support the loved one and help prevent that, because once someone gets put into the system, you don't have much control over that. So say a loved one is admitted to the emergency department. And first, this is going to be really confusing to your loved one because it's a strange environment. There's going to be lots of noise. It's going to be chaotic. So it's going to be really stressful for them. And when someone with dementia is stressed, they're in a new environment, they may start to act out and start to display signs of aggression. So at this point, what may happen is the providers, the medical staff in the emergency department may medically restrain your loved one by giving them a medication to sedate them. So as we know that once you provide medications to someone and you're sedating them, that's going to be a whole other host of problems. Someone becomes now even more of a high fall risk. They may have an adverse reaction to the medication that you're giving. And also from placement standpoint, going back to the assisted living, when they see a restraint, they're more hesitant to take that person back. So if we'll go back to when they're in the ED, so now they're going to be deemed that they need to go inpatient to an inpatient psychiatric setting, and they're going to be committed most likely against their will because they're not going to have the capacity to sign themselves in. So every state's different, but here in Massachusetts, we have what's called a Section 12. So the person's involuntarily committed against their will for 72 hours, 3 business days. So that person will be admitted to an inpatient psych department that has a connection with the emergency department. And they may be in a hospital system that doesn't have the best reputation, that you don't want them to be in. So again, this is when if you have a care partner, they can come to the emergency department, help advocate for your loved one to take them to an inpatient setting that you prefer, and they have the contacts to those hospitals to make that happen. But once they get admitted to the inpatient setting, you're kind of you're in a holding pattern, because the psychiatric provider has, again, up to 3 business days to assess them for safety. They may do medication adjustments. Again, this is a new environment for your loved one, and it can be scary, just like in the emergency department, and they may start to show aggressive behaviors because they're trying to protect themselves. They don't know where they are. They're very confused. And again, in this type of setting, most likely aggression or assaultive behaviors is going to lead to a restraint. It can be a medication restraint, a physical restraint, where someone's holding your loved one, or a mechanical restraint where they're actually being held down by a device. And again, when we're working on discharge for that loved one back to the assisted living or wherever they're going, if they're if they're in an independent living or a memory care unit, when they see the restraint episodes and the progress notes, they're going to be more hesitant to take that back, so that your loved one's going to stay longer on an inpatient psychiatric setting, which is not the right setting for that person.
That's terrifying. And I can imagine as symptoms escalate because of their terror, the length of stay increases.
Yeah. And I actually saw it one time. We had a patient at a sister hospital. She was on an inpatient psychiatric unit, had a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, had come from an assisted living community because she was just kind of displaying aggressive behaviors. They couldn't handle her symptoms. So she was admitted to the inpatient unit and, again, displaying these behaviors. And the hospital, the staff, they medicated her, and she was already at this age a high fall risk, and she was using a wheelchair, and she with Alzheimer's, it's hard to redirect, and she was in the dining room and she stood up, fell, ended up breaking her hip, breaking her wrist, so that she was admitted to the medical side, which extended her hospital stay. And then there's a whole host of complications that can come from that. And actually for her, it led to pneumonia. Luckily, she was recovered from that, but it's a journey that you don't want to go down if it can be prevented.
Thank you for that. Part of the issue that I hear from family members is that when the person struggling doesn't have acceptance or refuses to see or for whatever reason doesn't acknowledge their own diagnosis, what do family members do then?
Yeah, so this is challenging, and you really have to put yourself in that person's shoes. When I work with families, or I always try to put myself in their shoes and how are they feeling? Because I know I'm very highly independent. And if I were to have it where I lost capacity and I, became incontinent or had to have help getting dressed or taking care of my ADLs, I would be humiliated. I would be so embarrassed. But that's also, the families feel that as well. The caregiver can feel embarrassment to have to take care of your parent in this situation. So it's important, you need to have patience because this diagnosis represents loss of independence and a loss of autonomy. So if that stubbornness could represent a way for them to hold on to control that they have left. So the family members need to be really patient. This is a great time, to seek support, outside advice from friends, other family members. Again, if you're able to afford a care partner, this is a great opportunity to get someone on board because they can help you navigate this arena. They can provide family coaching to you. They can help have these difficult conversations. They can work with the parent to help them explain the diagnoses. They can look at all the information and really develop a plan that both you feel comfortable, the family feels comfortable with, and the loved one can hopefully accept and feel on board with. And the goal should be to keep that family member in place at home for as long as possible to help them just age with grace and dignity. And again, having them age in place is going to help them have a happier, longer life. But you just need the right supports.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate all of your wisdom and advice today and some of the just concrete tools that we can use when we have a loved one struggling with a new diagnosis or an old diagnosis that involves dementia. Appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here. Thanks.
And for my audience, thanks for joining this episode of Beyond the Balance Sheet podcast. If you found this enlightening, interesting, or even entertaining, please like us on your platform of choice.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Balance Sheet, a podcast designed to help advisors, clinical professionals, and affluent families solve some of their biggest medical, psychiatric, and emotional challenges. Visit beyondthebalancesheet.com to read more about our guests and resources and sign up for our newsletter.